My boyfriend's family found me lying close together with his brother in his room at 7 a.m., but somehow I'm the bad guy for being there when they weren't. It was my boyfriend, Jake's mum, Susan, who opened the door that morning. She knocked softly, thinking she was just waking up Jake's little brother Tyler for breakfast. But instead, she found me in my sleepwear, with Tyler's arm wrapped around my waist. The look on her face was pure shock, like she'd walked in on something inappropriate, instead of innocent family comfort. I sat up quickly and tried to explain that Tyler had been upset about his recent breakup, and I'd stayed to comfort him. Susan just stared at us for a second, then said breakfast was ready in this tone that was definitely not normal. Tyler was mortified, apologizing to his mum, trying to explain. I felt terrible that we'd caused any awkwardness. That's when my boyfriend Jake appeared in the doorway behind his mom, asking what was going on. When he saw me getting up from his brother's bed, his expression changed completely. It went from confusion to something I'd never seen before, this mixture of hurt and anger that made my stomach drop. Before I dive into this whole mess, I have a small favor to ask. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like if this story resonates with you, and drop a comment letting me know what city you're watching from. I love seeing how this community spans across the globe. Now let me tell you exactly how we got to that horrible morning. My name is Emma. I'm 26 and I teach elementary school. My boyfriend Jake is 29 and manages construction projects downtown. His little brother Tyler is 22 and goes to State University about 3 hours away. Jake's this amazing guy who always puts family first, remembers birthdays, calls his mum every Sunday. That's actually what I loved most about him, how close he was with his family. I thought it meant he'd appreciate someone who cared about them too. His little brother Tyler is 22 and goes to State University about 3 hours away. Tyler's always been the sensitive one in the family. You know, the artist type who writes poetry and actually talks about his feelings. When he went through this horrible breakup right before Thanksgiving, everyone was worried about him. His ex cheated on him with his roommate. Can you imagine? The poor kid was devastated. Jake invited Tyler to stay with us for the long weekend so he wouldn't be alone in his dorm. I thought it was sweet. I've always gotten along great with Tyler. He's like the little brother I never had. We'd watch movies together when he visited, talk about books, share inside jokes. Jake used to say how happy it made him that his girlfriend and brother were so close. That Thanksgiving weekend started out perfect. We drove up to Jake's parents' house Thursday morning, this beautiful old farmhouse where Jake grew up. His mum Susan had been cooking for days. His dad was already watching football, and his sister Lisa came with her kids. It felt like a real family gathering, the kind I'd always wanted growing up as an only child. Tyler seemed okay at first, laughing at dinner, playing with the kids, but I could tell he was putting on a brave face. I've worked with kids for years. I know when someone's hurting and trying to hide it. Thursday night, after everyone went to bed, I found him sitting on the back porch, crying. I sat down next to him and asked what was wrong. He started telling me about Sarah, his ex, how he thought they were going to get married after graduation. He said he felt stupid for trusting her, like maybe he wasn't good enough for anyone. My heart just broke for him. Here was this sweet kid, questioning his entire worth because some girl couldn't appreciate what she had. I put my arm around him and told him he was amazing, that Sarah was an idiot, that any girl would be lucky to have him. We talked for maybe an hour about relationships, about how some people just don't know a good thing when they see it. When he started shivering, I suggested we go inside. Jake was already asleep when I got back to our room. Tyler's room was right across the hall, and I could hear him crying through the walls. It was this quiet, heartbroken sound that just tore me apart. I'm naturally a caregiver. That's why I became a teacher. I can't stand to see someone suffering when I could help. I knocked softly on his door and asked if he was okay. He said he couldn't sleep, kept thinking about Sarah. I asked if he wanted to talk more, and he said yes. So I went in and sat on his bed while he told me more about what happened. He was so hurt, so confused about why she'd do that to him. The conversation went on for hours. He talked about feeling like he wasn't enough, like maybe he was too emotional, too sensitive. I kept reassuring him that those were good qualities, that the right person would love those things about him. At some point I realized he was getting sleepy but still seemed scared to be alone with his thoughts. I know how this is going to sound, but I made a decision that felt completely natural in the moment. I told him I'd stay until he fell asleep, that sometimes you just need someone there when you're going through something hard. He looked so grateful, so relieved not to be alone. I lay down next to him on top of the covers while he curled up under his blanket. We kept talking quietly about family, about college, about his plans after graduation, normal family stuff. I was rubbing his back like I would for any upset kid, trying to help him relax. Eventually, his breathing got deeper, and I thought he was asleep. I must have dozed off too, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window and Tyler's arm was around me. We'd shifted in our sleep and ended up close together, which honestly felt completely innocent. We're family, you know. It's not like there was anything romantic about it. That's when Susan knocked on the door to wake Tyler up for breakfast. She opened it and found us sleeping together, me still in my pajamas from the night before, Tyler's arm around my waist. The look on her face was pure shock. I sat up quickly and explained that Tyler had been upset and I'd stayed to comfort him. Susan just stared at us for a second, then said breakfast was ready in a tone that was definitely not normal. Tyler was mortified, apologizing to his mom, trying to explain. I felt terrible that we'd caused any awkwardness. Jake appeared in the doorway behind his mom, asking what was going on. When he saw me getting up from Tyler's bed, his expression changed completely. It went from confusion to something I'd never seen before, this mixture of hurt and anger that made my stomach drop. Susan quickly said something about breakfast getting cold and hurried downstairs. Jake just stood there staring at me like I was a stranger. I tried to explain what happened, but he cut me off, saying we'd talk about it later, then walked away. The rest of that morning was horrible. Everyone was acting weird, having these quiet conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. Tyler looked miserable, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Jake barely spoke to me, answering in one-word responses when I tried to talk to him. The car ride home was 3 hours of pure silence. I kept trying to bring up what happened, to explain that nothing inappropriate occurred, but Jake just turned up the radio. When we finally got to our apartment, he immediately went to take a shower without saying a word. I sat on our couch, feeling completely confused about why everyone was acting like I'd done something wrong. I'd comforted a family member who was going through a hard time. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Isn't that what caring people do for each other? When Jake came out of the bathroom, I asked if we could please talk about what happened. He sat down across from me, not next to me like he usually would, and asked me to explain why I was in his brother's bed. I told him exactly what I just told you, that Tyler was crying, that I went to comfort him, that I stayed because he was scared to be alone with his thoughts. I emphasized that nothing sexual happened, that we were just talking, and I fell asleep accidentally. Jake listened without interrupting, then asked why I thought it was appropriate to sleep in another man's room, even if it was his brother. I told him we weren't sleeping together, we were resting near each other, and there's a big difference. I said we're like family, that I was treating Tyler exactly like I'd treat a younger brother who was hurting. He pointed out that Tyler wasn't my brother, that he was a 22-year-old man, and that sleeping in bed with him crossed a line. I asked what line, exactly. Since nothing physical happened beyond comfort, I said I was being supportive, something his family clearly needed to learn how to do better. That's when Jake's expression really changed. He said his family knew how to be supportive without crossing boundaries, and asked what I meant by that comment. I explained that, from what I'd observed, the men in his family weren't comfortable with emotional intimacy, that they handled Tyler's breakup by basically ignoring it, instead of actually helping him process his feelings. I told Jake that maybe if his family was better at emotional support, Tyler wouldn't have needed to turn to me for comfort. Maybe if Jake had sat with his brother and actually talked about what happened, instead of just saying, "You'll get over it," Tyler wouldn't have been crying alone in his room. Jake stared at me for a long moment, then said that he'd spent 2 hours on the phone with Tyler the week before, helping him work through his feelings about Sarah. He said his dad had taken Tyler fishing that Tuesday to get his mind off things, and his mum had been sending care packages all semester. I realized that maybe Tyler hadn't told me about those things, but I maintained that clearly it wasn't enough, since he was still so upset. I said sometimes people need more intensive support, someone who's really there for them in the moment. Jake asked if being really there for someone meant getting into bed with them. I said that sometimes, yes, physical comfort was part of emotional support. I pointed out that when children are upset, we hold them, we stay with them until they feel safe. Why should it be different just because Tyler's an adult? He said because Tyler's an adult man, and I'm his brother's girlfriend, not his mother or sister. I said that was exactly the kind of rigid thinking that prevented proper emotional healing. I told Jake that his family's discomfort with physical affection was their problem, not mine. Jake got up and walked to the kitchen. I followed him, still trying to make him understand. I said I was sorry if my caring about his brother made him uncomfortable, but I wasn't going to apologize for being the kind of person who actually shows up when someone needs help. He turned around and asked if I really believed that getting into Tyler's bed was about helping him, or if it was about something else. I asked what he meant by something else, and he said he didn't know, that he was trying to figure it out. I told him there was nothing to figure out, that he was making this weird because he was insecure about my relationship with his family. I said maybe he was jealous that Tyler felt comfortable opening up to me when he apparently couldn't talk to his own brother. Jake's face went completely blank. He said he wasn't jealous. He was concerned about boundaries. He said that in his mind, sleeping in another man's bed, regardless of the circumstances, wasn't something people do when they're in committed relationships. I pointed out that this wasn't another man. This was his brother, someone I considered family. I said the fact that he couldn't see the difference showed how little he understood about real intimacy and family bonds. He asked if I would be okay with him sleeping in a bed with my sister if I had one, even if she was upset. I said of course, if she needed comfort, and he could provide it. He asked if I really meant that, and I said absolutely, because that's what mature adults do. Jake nodded slowly and said, okay. He guessed we just saw things differently. Then he said he was going to stay at his friend Mike's place for a few days to think about everything. I asked why he needed to think about anything, since nothing happened. He said that was the problem. I genuinely didn't seem to understand why he was upset, which made him question whether we were compatible. I told him that was ridiculous, that we were perfectly compatible. He was just overreacting to an innocent situation. As he packed a bag, I kept trying to explain that this was exactly what I meant about his family's issues with emotional intimacy. I said he was so uncomfortable with genuine care and affection that he was turning something beautiful into something dirty. Jake stopped packing and looked at me. He said sleeping in his brother's bed wasn't beautiful. It was inappropriate, and the fact that I couldn't see that worried him. Then he left. I spent that whole week feeling angry and confused. I called my friend Sarah and told her what happened. She said Jake was being controlling and jealous, that I'd done nothing wrong. She said it sounded like his family had serious issues with healthy emotional expression. Sarah pointed out that I was an elementary school teacher, someone trained to provide comfort to people in distress. She said it was natural for me to want to help Tyler, and that Jake's reaction showed his own insecurities about my caring nature. When Jake came back the following Friday, I thought he'd realized he was being ridiculous. Instead, he sat me down and said he'd been talking to his family about what happened. I immediately felt defensive, asking why he'd made our private business into a family discussion. He said because it involved his family, specifically his brother, and he wanted to understand if there was a pattern he'd missed. I asked what kind of pattern, and he said he'd talked to Lisa about my interactions with Tyler over the past year. Apparently Lisa had mentioned some things that concerned her, like how at Jake's birthday party in July, I'd sat on Tyler's lap during dinner because there weren't enough chairs, or how when we all went to the movies in August, Tyler and I had shared a blanket, and I'd fallen asleep with my head on his shoulder. I explained that these were all innocent interactions between family members. The lap sitting was practical. There literally weren't enough seats. The movie thing was just comfort. We were watching a long film, and I was tired from work. Jake said Lisa also mentioned that Tyler and I had gone for a 2-hour walk by ourselves during the family reunion in September, and that we'd seemed very close, holding hands at one point. I said we weren't holding hands. Tyler had helped me over some rocks by the creek, and we'd had a great conversation about his classes. I told Jake that Lisa was clearly jealous of my relationship with Tyler because she'd never been able to connect with him the way I had. I said some people just have natural emotional intelligence that allows them to bond with others, and apparently that threatened Lisa. Jake said this wasn't about Lisa being threatened. It was about him realizing that what happened Thanksgiving wasn't an isolated incident. He said, looking back, he could see that my relationship with Tyler had always been unusually physical and intimate. I asked what was unusual about caring about someone, about being affectionate with family. I pointed out that his family was just uncomfortable with emotional closeness, which was their dysfunction, not mine. He said there was a difference between being caring and being inappropriate, and asked if I could see that difference. I said no, I couldn't, because there wasn't one. I said the only inappropriate thing was his family's discomfort with genuine love and support. Jake was quiet for a long time, then said he thought we should take a break. I asked what kind of break, and he said he needed space to figure out if this relationship was right for him. I told him he was making a huge mistake, throwing away something good because his family had poisoned him against me. He said his family hadn't poisoned him against anyone, that he was making his own decisions based on his own observations. I said his observations were filtered through his family's unhealthy attitudes about emotional intimacy. That's when Jake said something that really hurt. He said, maybe I was right. Maybe his family did have issues with emotional intimacy, but my solution wasn't to fix that by becoming physically intimate with his brother. He said that wasn't my role or my place. I told him I wasn't physically intimate with Tyler. I was emotionally supportive. He said sleeping in someone's bed was physical intimacy, regardless of sexual activity. I said that was ridiculous, that physical intimacy required sexual intent, which was completely absent. Jake left again that night and didn't come back for 2 weeks. When he finally returned, it was to get more of his clothes. He said he'd decided we should break up officially. I begged him to reconsider, to go to counseling, to work through his family's issues together. He said this wasn't about his family's issues anymore. It was about mine. He said my inability to see appropriate boundaries was a bigger problem than he'd initially realized. I asked what boundaries I'd crossed, exactly, and he said that was the problem. I genuinely couldn't see them. I tried one more time to explain that everything I'd done came from a place of love and care, that I was trying to be the supportive family member Tyler needed. Jake said Tyler didn't need that kind of support from me, and if he did, it was Jake's job to provide it, or find appropriate help. I said that was exactly the kind of limited thinking that had created this problem in the first place. I told Jake that love doesn't follow rigid rules about who can comfort whom and how. I said real families support each other without arbitrary boundaries. Jake picked up his suitcase and said maybe that was true, but we clearly had different definitions of appropriate family support. He said he needed to be with someone who understood boundaries instinctively, not someone he had to explain them to. As he headed toward the door, I asked if he was really going to throw away 2 years together because I cared about his brother. He turned around and said no. He was ending things because I cared about his brother in ways that weren't appropriate for his girlfriend. I said I'd never done anything sexual with Tyler, never even thought about him that way. Jake said he believed that, but that sexual intent wasn't the only way to cross boundaries in relationships. He said emotional and physical intimacy had their own boundaries that I seemed unable or unwilling to respect. I told him that was the saddest thing I'd ever heard, that he was so damaged by his family's emotional dysfunction that he couldn't recognize healthy caring when he saw it. Jake said, maybe I was right about his family having issues, but that didn't make my behavior appropriate. Then he said something that really stung. He said the fact that I kept blaming his family, instead of examining my own actions, showed him everything he needed to know about my character. He said someone who was genuinely caring would be concerned about making their partner uncomfortable, not defensive about their right to continue the behavior. After Jake left, I felt completely lost. Sarah kept telling me I'd done nothing wrong, that Jake was emotionally immature and controlling. But part of me started wondering if maybe I had crossed some line I didn't understand. I decided to reach out to Tyler directly to get his perspective. When I called him, he surprised me by saying he could understand why Jake was uncomfortable with our closeness. He said that looking back, things like sleeping in his bed and our physical comfort might have seemed inappropriate to others. I told Tyler that Jake's discomfort was his problem to deal with, not ours. Tyler was quiet, then said, maybe we could have been more thoughtful about how our closeness might affect Jake. That conversation left me confused. Even Tyler was starting to doubt whether our relationship was appropriate. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that this was just internalized dysfunction from Jake's family. Tyler had been conditioned to feel guilty about accepting emotional support. I made one last attempt to fix things by meeting Jake for coffee. We spent an hour going in circles. Every boundary he described, I had a reason why it was unnecessary. Finally, he said we had completely different understandings of appropriate behavior in relationships. He said he needed to be with someone who shared his values about boundaries and respect. That was 6 months ago. Jake moved out completely the next week. Tyler transferred to a different university, apparently to get some distance from the whole situation. Jake's family stopped inviting me to events, which I expected but still hurt. The hardest part is that I still don't fully understand what I did wrong. I provided comfort to someone who needed it. I showed up for family in a way that apparently his biological family couldn't or wouldn't. I offered the kind of emotional support that actually helps people heal. Maybe Jake was right that we had different values about relationships and boundaries. Maybe I am more open to emotional intimacy than most people. But I can't see how that makes me the villain in this story. I lost the man I thought I'd marry because I cared too much about his family. Because I was willing to provide comfort when someone needed it, regardless of arbitrary social rules about who can touch whom and when. Sarah says I dodged a bullet, that Jake would have been controlling about other things eventually. She says any man who gets threatened by his girlfriend caring about his family has serious insecurity issues that would have surfaced in other ways. But sometimes, late at night in my empty apartment, I wonder if maybe I really did miss something important. Maybe there were boundaries I should have seen that I couldn't recognize. Maybe caring about someone isn't always enough justification for every action you take. The thing is, I'd probably do it all again. If I saw Tyler crying, if he needed someone to stay with him, if he needed comfort that his family couldn't provide, I'd still want to help. Maybe that makes me wrong, but it also makes me human. I guess I'll never understand how showing love and support for someone in pain could destroy a relationship with someone who claimed to love me. But that's exactly what happened. And now I'm alone trying to figure out if caring too much is really such a terrible thing.